The last thing I felt was the cold. It was a sharp, crystalline agony that started in the tips of my toes and worked its way inward, seizing my muscles and slowing my blood until I was sure it would crack in my veins like ice on a winter lake. I died on a grimy sidewalk, curled into a ball against a brick wall that offered no real shelter. The snow fell with a gentle indifference, dusting my threadbare jacket, a shroud for a woman the world had already forgotten. My name was Alara Vance and I was a ghost. Not a spectral apparition but something worse in the modern world. An unperson. A blank space in the government's databases. A zero. As the darkness closed in, my mind didn't flash before my eyes. Instead, it replayed the conversation that had led me here just hours earlier. The conversation that had killed me as surely as the cold. I had gone to the provincial capital, a journey that took the last of my strength and savings, to try one final time. I needed to reclaim my identity to prove I existed so I could claim a pittance of a pension. The clerk, a young woman with kind eyes and a crisp uniform, had typed my name into her computer. Her smile had faltered. She'd typed again, her fingers more urgent. Then she'd looked at me, and her expression was a gut-wrenching mix of pity and confusion. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she'd said, her voice hushed. "There's no record. Alara Vance, you don't exist in the system." The floor had dropped out from under me. 18 years of struggle, of being turned away from jobs, from night schools, from aid lines, suddenly made a terrible, horrifying sense. It wasn't bad luck. It was design. I'd stumbled back to the only home I'd ever known, a small house on the outskirts of the military base where my husband, Julian Thorne, was a respected commander. I was shivering, my mind reeling, when I heard their voices from the living room. Julian and our daughter Chloe. The daughter we'd adopted from an orphanage, he'd said to be a companion for me during his long deployments. But the words I heard were not those of a father and his adopted child. "Dad, when are you going to get rid of that woman?" Chloe's voice was sharp, petulant. "Mom is a nationally recognized research fellow now. I want to live with my real mother. When can I officially acknowledge her?" Julian's reply was a low, soothing murmur. "Soon, sweetheart. We have to be patient. Everything is in place." The truth detonated inside my skull. Not me. Serena. Julian's childhood sweetheart. The woman who, 18 years ago, had burned my acceptance letter to Stanford University in a fit of jealous rage. The woman Julian had promised to send to a military camp for discipline. He hadn't punished her. He had rewarded her. He had erased me and given her my life. My identity, my future, even my name on his marriage certificate. And Chloe, my Chloe, the girl I had raised, loved, and sacrificed everything for, was their biological daughter. I had burst into the room, a raw, wounded animal sound tearing from my throat. "You monster. You turned me into nothing." Julian's face, once the cornerstone of my world, had hardened into a mask of cold contempt. Chloe had looked at me with a sneer of pure disgust. There were no excuses, no denials. The charade was over. "You are nothing," Julian had said, his voice flat and final. He grabbed my arm, his grip brutal, and shoved me toward the door. "Serena Thorne is my wife. You are a legal fiction. A ghost. Now get out." The door had slammed shut. I'd landed on the icy steps, the sound of the lock turning echoing like a death knell. A week later I was dead. But then, I wasn't. I opened my eyes to the scent of lemon polish and summer sunlight. The air was warm, thick with the hum of a fan. I was lying on our living room couch, the familiar floral pattern scratchy against my cheek. Disorientation washed over me, followed by a tidal wave of memory so vivid it stole my breath. The cold. The hunger. The betrayal. "Hey Alara, you finished your application, right? Do you think you'll get into Stanford?" The voice was Julian's. Young, vibrant, laced with an eager anticipation I had mistaken for pride. I turned my head. There he was, leaning in the doorway, handsome in his crisp uniform, a smile playing on his lips. He looked exactly as he had 1 month before Serena burned the letter. 1 month before my life was stolen. A tremor ran through me. It wasn't fear. It was the shock of a furnace blast igniting in the core of my being. Rage, so pure and cold it made the memory of my frozen death feel like a summer breeze. I had been reborn. Given a second chance. I took a slow, deliberate breath, forcing my expression into a calm mask. The instincts of a woman who had learned to hide her pain for 18 years kicked in. I could not let him see. Not yet. Of course, I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled slightly in my lap. I clenched them into fists. Didn't I tell you my scores were high? His eyes lit up with a genuine, predatory gleam. It was the look of a hunter seeing the trap about to spring shut. I knew you could do it. Now I can finally relax. He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. In my first life, that smile had filled me with warmth. Now I saw the calculation behind it, the cold satisfaction of a plan falling into place. His relaxation wasn't for me, it was for himself. The hard part, getting me to succeed, was over. The easy part, stealing that success, was about to begin. I nodded, a tight, controlled movement, and looked away, pretending to be absorbed in a loose thread on the couch. Inside, my mind was racing, a whirlwind of plans and vengeful fantasies. They thought I was a pawn. They were about to learn that this pawn had learned the entire game by heart, and I was coming for the king and queen. The first few days were a torturous exercise in self-control. Every kind word from Julian was a lie. Every affectionate touch felt like a spider crawling on my skin. I had to endure it. I had to play the part of the happy, oblivious wife, all the while knowing the viper's nest I was sleeping in. My first objective was simple: prevent the admission letter from ever arriving. In my past life, the physical letter was the key. Without it, the university had been inflexible. This time there would be no letter to burn. I waited for a day when Julian was on base and I was sure I wouldn't be interrupted. I sat down at the small writing desk in our bedroom, a desk I had once loved for the letters I would write to Julian during his missions. Now I would use it to orchestrate his ruin. I wrote 2 letters. The first was to the admissions office at Stanford. My hand was perfectly steady as I wrote, formally withdrawing my application for the upcoming academic year. I cited unforeseen personal circumstances that would prevent me from attending. I thanked them for their consideration and requested a confirmation of my withdrawal. It was polite, concise, and utterly devastating to Julian and Serena's plans. The second letter was harder. It was to the Military Disciplinary Committee. I couldn't reveal everything, they would think me mad, but I could plant a seed. I wrote anonymously, suggesting that a high-ranking officer, Commander Julian Thorne, might be involved in unethical, potentially illegal activities pertaining to personal records and identity documentation. I hinted at a conflict of interest involving a civilian woman named Serena. I didn't accuse, I merely suggested an audit might be prudent. I signed it, a concerned citizen. I sealed both envelopes and, with a heart pounding not with fear, but with grim purpose, I walked to the post office and mailed them. The click of the mailbox door closing sounded like the cocking of a gun. As I walked home, the summer sun warm on my face, I felt a sliver of the ice around my heart begin to melt. The first move was mine. They were still playing checkers, unaware that I had switched the board to chess. The next test came sooner than I expected. Serena arrived for one of her frequent unannounced visits. She swept in, a vision of false innocence, carrying a familiar-looking thermal container. "Wow, Ilara, you're amazing," she gushed, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "You actually got into Stanford. Not like me. I didn't even qualify to take the entrance exam." She let her shoulders slump, casting a helpless doe-eyed look at Julian, who had just entered the room. As if on cue, he went to her side, placing a comforting hand on her arm. "It's okay, Rena. To me, you'll always be the most amazing." The performance was so transparent, so nauseatingly rehearsed, I wondered how I had ever missed it. In my past life, this was the moment she had given me the peanut-laced chicken soup that would send me to the hospital, giving her the perfect opportunity to snoop and find my admission letter. This time, when she handed me the bowl with a simpering smile, I didn't take it. I picked up the spoon and stirred the soup slowly, deliberately scraping the bottom of the bowl. The rich, savory aroma couldn't disguise the gritty texture of crushed peanuts. I looked up, meeting her eyes. My gaze was flat, cold. "I'm severely allergic to peanuts, Serena. You know that. Were you trying to kill me?" The change in her was instantaneous. Her face lost all its color. Her eyes welled with tears that were so convincing I almost believed them myself. "I didn't know. I'm so sorry, Ilara. Please, please don't hate me." She began to tremble, a masterpiece of feigned distress. Julian shot me a warning look, his protective instincts immediately flaring for her. "Rena didn't do it on purpose. You didn't even have a reaction. Why are you making such a big deal out of nothing? A cold, mirthless laugh escaped my lips. So, you'll only care once I'm choking on the floor and you're calling the morgue? His expression darkened with anger. Seeing that her initial tactic was failing, Serena escalated. It's all my fault. You can hit me if it'll make you feel better. She took a dramatic step toward me, then let out a piercing shriek and collapsed to the floor in a heap, the bowl of scalding soup flying from her hands and splashing across my forearm. White-hot agony lanced up my arm. My skin turned an angry, blotchy red and blisters began to rise almost instantly. But Julian didn't even glance at the injury. He was on his knees, gathering a sobbing Serena into his arms as if she were made of glass. "Ilara, what the hell is your problem?" he roared, his face a mask of fury. "Do you ever stop? Why make a fuss over every little thing?" Cradled in his arms, Serena sniffled pitifully. "It's fine, Julian. Ilara got into college. She's got a bright future. She has every right to be mad at me." Then as Julian lifted her to carry her to the kitchen to check her injuries, she peeked over his shoulder. Her eyes met mine and she gave me a smug, triumphant smile. Her lips formed silent, unmistakable words. "Everything you have is mine now." I stood there, my arm throbbing with a pain that was both physical and a searing reminder of all the pain to come. I turned and walked to the sink, letting the cold water run over the burn. The shock of it was a strange comfort, an anchor in the surreal storm of my second chance. This was the battlefield, and I was just beginning to fight. The cold water provided a few moments of blessed numbness, but as soon as I turned off the tap, the pain returned with a vengeance. A deep, throbbing ache that pulsed in time with my heartbeat. The blisters on my forearm were already swelling, angry and taut. Ignoring the muffled sounds of Serena's continued performance from the kitchen, I walked calmly to the hallway closet, retrieved my small purse and left the house without a backward glance. The slam of the door was a satisfyingly final sound. The walk to the local clinic was a study in surrealism. The summer sun beat down on my head, a stark contrast to the icy death I remembered so clearly. Each step was a reminder that this body was young, strong and healthy, not the worn-out husk I had died in. The pain in my arm was a temporary affliction, not a permanent state. This knowledge fueled my resolve. The clinic was quiet, smelling of antiseptic and floor wax. The doctor, a weary-looking man in his 50s, tooted as he examined the burn. "This is serious, miss. Second-degree burns. You should have disinfected it right away." He glanced at my face, his eyes curious. "How did this happen?" "An accident," I said flatly. "A bowl of hot soup." He shook his head, cleaning the wound with a practiced gentleness that almost brought unexpected tears to my eyes. It was the first kind touch I had experienced in what felt like a lifetime. "You need to be more careful. Infection is no joke." As he applied a silvery salve and began wrapping my arm in a clean white bandage, he continued almost to himself, "Some people have all the luck. Just before you, a couple came in. The wife had a tiny red mark on her hand, no worse than a sunburn. You'd think she'd lost the limb the way they were carrying on. The husband was a military man, very commanding. Must be nice to be fussed over like that." My blood ran cold even in the warmth of the clinic. A couple. A military man. Julian and Serena had come here. To this very clinic. For a nothing injury. The sheer audacity of their performance, the calculated effort to paint me as the aggressor and Serena as the victim, was breathtaking. And the doctor's casual comment confirmed my darkest suspicion from my past life. Serena's collapse had been a complete sham. "Yes," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Must be nice." The doctor finished his work and gave me instructions for caring for the burn, along with a tube of antibiotic ointment. I paid in cash, money I had carefully squirreled away from the grocery budget over the past week, knowing I would need independent funds, and stepped back out into the sunlight. I didn't go home immediately. I walked to the small park near our house and sat on a bench watching children play on the swings. Their carefree shouts echoed in the hollow space inside me. I needed a plan. A real, concrete plan beyond just preventing the admission letter. Mailing those letters was a start, but it was a defensive move. I needed to go on the offensive. The memory of the hospital from my first life surfaced. The nurse's offhand comment. Morning sickness. That was the key. That was the tangible proof of their betrayal. the undeniable evidence that would shatter Julian's facade of the devoted husband. When I finally returned home, the house was silent. A tense, waiting silence. I pushed the door open to a scene of calculated disarray. The living room was tidy, but my bedroom looked like it had been ransacked. The drawers of my dresser were pulled open, their contents spilling out. My jewelry box, a simple wooden thing that had been my mother's, was upturned on the vanity, its few precious items scattered across the surface. And there sat Serena, preening in front of the mirror, a pair of my mother's gold droplet earrings dangling from her lobes. They were the last significant thing my mother had owned, given to me on her deathbed. Seeing them on Serena, on the woman who had helped destroy me, sent a fresh wave of rage so potent it tasted like metal in my mouth. Julian stood nearby, watching her with an indulgent smile that froze when he saw me in the doorway. "What the hell are you doing?" My voice was low, but it vibrated with a fury I made no effort to conceal. "That's my dowry. Who gave you permission to touch it?" Julian's face shifted instantly to impatience. "For God's sake, Alara, it's just a few pieces of gold. You caused a scene and hurt Rena. Consider it compensation." Compensation. The word was a shard of glass in my throat. That was the last thing my mother gave me before she died. You stood right beside her bed and swore to her you would care for me. Did you forget the promise you made to a dying woman? For a single fleeting moment I saw a flicker in his eyes. A shadow of the man he might have once been, a ghost of shame. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold irritation. "Alara, when did you become such a shrew? This time you're the one being unreasonable." "I was just trying to smooth things over." Then Serena, seeing an opportunity to twist the knife, piped up. She touched one of the earrings with a feigned shudder. "I can't believe these were used by a dead person. That's so creepy. It gives me the chills." Before I could even process the venom in her words, she yanked the earrings from her ears. With a contemptuous flick of her wrist, she threw them out the open bedroom window. A flash of gold caught the sun, and then they were gone, vanished into the overgrown bushes below. A sound tore from me, something between a gasp and a sob. I didn't think. I ran. I shoved past Julian, flew down the stairs and burst out the front door, dropping to my knees on the hot, gritty pavement. My bandaged arms screamed in protest as I frantically scrabbled through the sharp-edged juniper bushes, my tears blurring my vision. The physical pain was nothing compared to the devastation of losing that last tangible connection to my mother. My commotion drew attention. Curtains twitched in neighboring houses. A few people walking by stopped to stare. And then Serena was there, standing over me, her performance reaching Oscar-worthy heights. "Alara," she wailed, her voice pitched to Carrie. "Just because you got into college, does that mean you can bully people now? How could you try to curse me with a dead woman's belongings?" The gathered crowd murmured, their faces shifting from curiosity to disapproval. I was the intellectual bully, she was the poor, victimized girl. Julian emerged from the house and stood over me, not offering a hand, but adding his voice to the public condemnation. "You're my wife, Alara," he said, his voice heavy with a long-suffering tone that made me want to vomit. "Can you not make things difficult for me? Just apologize to Rena and we'll put this behind us." The weight of it all, the betrayal, the theft, the public humiliation, crashed down on me. The world began to swim, the faces of the crowd blurring into a hostile, judging mosaic. The summer heat suddenly felt suffocating. A wave of dizziness overwhelmed me, and the gritty pavement rushed up to meet my cheek. The last thing I heard before darkness swallowed me was a cry from Serena, a perfect theatrical gasp of concern, and the sound of Julian's footsteps, not moving toward my collapsed form but running back to her. I awoke to the steady beep of a heart monitor and the stark whiteness of a hospital room. And 4 was taped to the back of my hand. For a terrifying moment I thought I had dreamed it all, that I was still the dying ghost of my first life. But the absence of the gnawing cold, the smooth youth of the hand with the 4 confirmed it. I was back. A nurse bustled in, her smile cheerful and impersonal. "Ah, you're awake. Good. You gave everyone quite a scare. Dehydration and shock, the doctor thinks." He checked my 4 bag. "Your friends were so worried. The wife is having terrible morning sickness, poor thing. Just went down the hall for a checkup with the OB." The words landed with the force of a physical blow. Morning sickness. OB. So it was true. It was already happening. Serena was pregnant. The child I would know as Chloe, was already growing inside her. The timeline clicked into place with horrifying clarity. They hadn't just stolen my future on a whim. It was a calculated, long-term plan. Steal the identity, have the child, and eventually erase the original. Any last, faint hope that I might be mistaken, that some sliver of the Julian I once loved might remain, evaporated in that sterile room. This was a conspiracy, cold and complete. The nurse left and I lay there staring at the acoustic tile ceiling. The pain in my arm was a dull throb. The emotional turmoil of the day had been replaced by a chilling calm. They had shown me their hand. Now I knew exactly what I was dealing with. As soon as a doctor had cleared me for discharge, I got dressed and left. I didn't wait for Julian. I walked out of the hospital, the bright afternoon sun feeling like a searchlight. I had 2 more stops to make. First, the post office. I checked the P.O. box I had rented under a false name, a necessary precaution. There, nestled between flyers, was a single businesslike envelope. From Stanford. My hands trembled as I tore it open. It was a brief, formal letter acknowledging my withdrawal from the applicant pool. It wished me well in my future endeavors. A smile, thin and sharp, touched my lips. One piece of the trap was securely set. Next I went to the bank. Not our usual joint bank, but a different one across town. I approached a teller and smiled politely. "I'd like to open a new savings account, please." The teller, a young woman, smiled back. "Of course. Just need to see some ID and we'll get you set up." I handed over my driver's license and social security card. She typed my information into her computer. Her smile faltered. He typed again, frowning. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The system is having some trouble verifying your social security number. It's probably just a glitch. Could you come back tomorrow?" A cold certainty settled in my stomach. It was already happening. Julian was already working in the background, beginning the process of disentangling me from the system, making my existence tenuous. He was moving faster than I had anticipated. His confidence was his arrogance, and his arrogance was going to be his downfall. "No problem," I said smoothly, taking back my documents. "I'll try again another time." I walked out of the bank, the gravity of the situation pressing down on me. But alongside the fear was a fierce, burning triumph. He had made his first mistake. He was acting too quickly, too boldly. And in his haste to replace me, he was leaving a trail. A digital footprint of fraud. I had prevented the admission letter. I had planted a seed with the disciplinary committee. And now I had confirmation of his activities. The game was indeed afoot. The ghost was learning how to be a hunter. The walk home from the bank was a study in controlled focus. Each step was measured, my mind a whirlwind of strategy. Julian's early moves were a gift. His arrogance was a tangible force, a cloud around him that blinded him to the subtle shifts in my behavior. He saw what he expected to see, a distressed, emotionally volatile wife, reacting exactly as he'd predicted to Serena's provocations. He didn't see the cold calculation beneath my tears, the architect surveying the blueprint of his own destruction. I found him in the living room when I returned, pretending to read a military manual. He looked up, his expression a masterful blend of concern and mild reproach. "There you are. The hospital said you discharged yourself." I was worried. The lie was so smooth, so effortless. In my first life, this performance would have melted me. Now I saw the gears turning. He needed me placated, stable until the final act of their play. "I'm fine," I said, my voice deliberately flat. I held up my bandaged arm. "Just needed some air." The smell of antiseptic was giving me a headache. He nodded, his eyes lingering on the bandage with what almost looked like genuine regret. "Alara, about the earrings. Serena was out of line. She's highly strung. You know how she is." This was new. A pseudo-apology. A tactic to lower my guard. He was adapting, which meant I had to be smarter. "It doesn't matter," I murmured, looking away as if defeated. "They're gone." I let my shoulders slump, injecting a tremor into my voice. "I just feel so tired, Julian. All the time." A flash of satisfaction crossed his face before he could mask it. Exhaustion, emotional fragility, these were useful traits in a pawn. "I know, my love," he said, crossing the room to pull me into a hug. His arms around me felt like a prison. I forced myself to relax against him, to mimic the sigh of a woman seeking comfort. It's the stress of the exam, the waiting. Once the admission letter comes, everything will settle down. You'll see. The irony was so thick I could taste it. Once the letter comes. The letter that would never arrive. The letter that was the linchpin of their entire scheme. Over the next 2 weeks I became a ghost in my own home, but a ghost with a purpose. I played my part to perfection. The nervous, excited prospective student, followed by the increasingly confused and anxious one as the typical notification dates came and went. I made a show of checking the mail first thing every morning, my face falling with each passing day. Maybe it got lost in the mail, I'd say, my voice laced with a worry that was only partially feigned. I needed to sell the performance that I was just as eager for that letter as they were. Meanwhile, I was laying the groundwork for the public spectacle I intended to create. I needed witnesses. I needed to make the collapse of their plan as humiliating and undeniable as possible. I began making phone calls, my tone bright and hopeful. "Aunt Martha? It's Alara. Yes, we're waiting on the letter any day now. I know, it's so exciting. I was thinking when it comes you should all come over. We could have a little celebration. Oh, would you? That would be wonderful." I called former teachers, neighbors, even the stern-faced wife of Julian's commanding officer. I invited them all for a small gathering on the day the final batch of admission letters was due to arrive. I painted a picture of a humble, hopeful girl on the cusp of a dream, wanting to share the moment with those who supported her. It was a narrative designed to elicit maximum sympathy and later maximum outrage. Julian watched these preparations with a strange, tense anticipation. He thought I was building my own stage for a very public fall. He'd pull me aside, his voice low. "Alara, are you sure about this? What if the news isn't good? Wouldn't it be better to wait, just the two of us?" "Oh, but everyone's been so kind," I'd reply, widening my eyes with a convincing blend of hope and stubbornness. "And my scores were so high. I'm sure it's just a delay. I want to share our happiness with everyone." He couldn't argue without sounding unsupportive. He was trapped by the very narrative he had helped create. I saw the flicker of unease in his eyes, the first tiny crack in his confidence. Serena, however, was less restrained. She visited frequently, her pregnancy not yet showing but her possessiveness over Julian growing more blatant. She'd touch his arm, laugh at his jokes, shooting me triumphant little glances when he wasn't looking. "All this fuss for a piece of paper," she'd sneer under her breath one afternoon as I was setting out glasses for the impending party. "You're going to look like such a fool." I simply smiled at her, a slow, deliberate smile that didn't reach my eyes. "We'll see." My most critical move was yet to come. I needed an authority figure, someone whose word would be beyond reproach when the truth came out. I needed my former high school principal, Mr. Albright. I waited for a day when Julian was on a long training exercise. I dressed carefully, modest, respectful, and walked to his office at the school. The secretary recognized me. "Alara Vance, the star student. Here to see Mr. Albright." "If he has a moment," I said softly. Mr. Albright was a tall, gaunt man with a kind face and a reputation for integrity. He greeted me warmly. "Alara, to what do I owe the pleasure? Come to gloat about your stellar scores." He chuckled. "Not exactly, sir," I said, taking the seat he offered. I folded my hands in my lap, willing them to be still. "I'm actually worried." His smile faded. "Worried? What about?" I took a deep breath, choosing my words with the precision of a surgeon. "It's about my college application. There's been no word from Stanford, and I know my scores were more than sufficient. I'm concerned. Well, sir, I'm concerned there may have been some tampering." His bushy eyebrows shot up. "Tampering? That's a serious accusation, Alara." "I know," I said, meeting his gaze steadily. "And I have no proof. That's why I'm here. I was hoping, on the day the final notifications are sent, would you be willing to come to my home? If the letter has arrived, we can celebrate. But if it hasn't," I let the sentence hang. "If it hasn't, your presence would lend weight to my request for an official investigation. You could verify that my application was indeed submitted. You knew me, sir. You know I wouldn't make this up. I was playing a dangerous game. I was implying a threat without naming it, appealing to his sense of justice." I saw the conflict in his eyes, the desire to help a favored student warring with the potential for messy, personal drama. "Alara," he said slowly, "this is highly irregular. What are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything, sir, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. I'm just afraid. My husband, he has a very close friend. A woman who failed her preliminary exams. She's been very interested in my application process. I let a single perfect tear trace a path down my cheek. It wasn't entirely acting. The memory of that burning jealousy was visceral. That did it. The mention of Serena, the unspoken suggestion of a romantic entanglement, clicked things into place for him. He was a man of the world, he understood envy. He leaned back, his expression grave. I see. He steepled his fingers. Very well. I will come. Discreetly. If there is any foul play, the school will not stand for it. A student's future is not a plaything. Relief, sharp and sweet, flooded through me. Thank you, sir. Thank you. As I walked home, a light rain began to fall, cooling my heated skin. I had my witness. I had my audience. The stage was set. The night before the party, the house was thick with tension. Julian paced the living room, his nervous energy a stark contrast to my feigned, calm preparation. I was polishing the good glasses, my movements slow and deliberate. Ilara, maybe we should call it off, he said abruptly, stopping his pacing. This is too much pressure for you. I looked up, allowing a mask of confused disappointment to settle on my face. Call it off? But everyone is coming. All our friends, they're so happy for us. Don't you want to celebrate with them? I let my lip quiver slightly. Unless you don't think I got in? It was a masterstroke. He was cornered. If he insisted on canceling, it would look like he lacked faith in me. He couldn't risk that. No, of course I do, he said quickly, forcing a smile. I'm just being an overprotective worrywart. Ignore me. He came over and kissed my forehead, his lips cold. Tomorrow will be a great day. Later that night, as I lay awake in the dark, I heard the faint murmur of voices from the kitchen. I slipped out of bed and crept to the top of the stairs. Can't back out now, Julian was hissing. What if she's up to something? Serena's voice was shrill with anxiety. She's been so calm. It's not right. She's scared. She's putting on a brave face. It's what she does. Tomorrow, when that letter doesn't come, she'll fall apart in front of everyone. It will be the perfect public breakdown. No one will question it when she decides to take a year off. And then we move. I smiled in the darkness. They were so sure. They were writing the script for their own downfall. The morning of the party dawned bright and clear. I dressed carefully in a simple light blue dress, the picture of fresh-faced optimism. By 10 o'clock, the house was filling with people. The air was buzzing with congratulations and the clinking of glasses. A mountain of brightly wrapped gifts sat in a corner, a testament to the future everyone believed I had. Aunt Martha enveloped me in a lavender-scented hug. Any minute now, dear. Any minute. Serena stood near the punch bowl, her face a rigid mask of a smile. Her eyes kept darting to the door, to the clock, to Julian. The jealousy rolling off her was a palpable heat. Julian moved through the crowd, playing the proud husband, but I saw the sweat beading on his temple, the tightness around his mouth. The climax came just before noon. The doorbell rang. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to the door. Julian rushed to open it, a triumphant smile already forming on his lips. But it wasn't the mailman. It was Principal Albright holding a single slim document folder. His face was grim. The murmurs started immediately. The principal. He's come himself. No wonder she got in. Julian's smile didn't falter. It widened. He ushered the principal in with a flattering, obsequious manner. Principal Albright. Thank you so much for coming all this way. This is such an honor. Principal Albright gave a curt nod. I had to come today. There was no way I could skip this. Noah immediately misinterpreted this, his voice eager. She's my wife. Whatever it is, you can tell me. But why don't you go ahead and give us the admission letter first? Let's make it official. Under the expectant gaze of the entire room, Principal Albright let out a long, heavy sigh. He opened the folder. Inside was not a thick, embossed letter but a single sheet of paper. Ilara's exam results were excellent, he said, pulling out the transcript. Julian glanced at it and beamed, playing his part. Just as I thought. Such high scores. She definitely made it into Stanford. He reached out and snatched the folder from the principal, shaking it open. So, where's the admission letter? The silence in the room was absolute as he scanned the empty folder. The longer he looked, the darker his expression became. The smile melted from his face, replaced by a confused frown, then by dawning horror. He raised his head sharply, his eyes blazing as they found mine. "What's going on?" he snapped, his voice cracking with a tension that was very real. "Why isn't the Stanford letter here?" It was Principal Albright who answered, his voice clear and carrying, filled with a solemn authority that silenced the last of the whispers. "That's actually why I came today," he said. "We were puzzled when no notification arrived, so we investigated." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on the crowded room. "It turns out the college application form Alara submitted was completely blank." The silence shattered into a cacophony of gasps. And in the center of the storm I stood perfectly still, a calm island in the chaos I had orchestrated. The first act was over. The real show was about to begin. The silence that followed Principal Albright's announcement was so profound I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. It lasted for a single suspended heartbeat and then the room erupted. The sound was a physical force. A wave of confused exclamations, shocked murmurs, and the sharp grating sound of Serena's voice cutting through the din. "What?" she shrieked, lunging forward. She snatched the empty folder from Julian's limp hands, tearing it open herself as if the admission letter might be hiding behind the transcript. Her face, once a mask of pretty envy, contorted into something ugly and disbelieving. "What is this? No way, Alara. Didn't you say you applied to Stanford? Where's the admission letter?" Her eyes, wide and frantic, locked onto me. They were filled with a venom so pure it could have curdled the punch. Her voice rose to a shrill crescendo. You did this on purpose. You're insane." I remained where I was, my arms folded calmly across my chest. The eyes of everyone in the room were on me now, a mixture of pity, confusion, and dawning suspicion. I met Serena's hysterical gaze with an indifference that seemed to infuriate her even more. "I only said my scores were good enough to get into Stanford," I stated, my voice even and clear, carrying easily over the residual chatter. "I never said I actually applied." The admission hung in the air, simple and devastating. Serena's mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping on land. You, she sputtered, her finger jabbing accusingly in my direction. "This is a trick. You're trying to sabotage me." The slip was fatal. The words were out before Julian could stop her. A fresh wave of murmurs swept through the crowd. Sabotage her? Why would Alara's college application have anything to do with Serena? Julian's face was ashen. He grabbed Serena's arm, a silent, desperate command to shut up. He was struggling to regain control, to spin this. He adopted a pained, deeply disappointed expression, the look of a long-suffering husband. "Alara," he began, his voice heavy with a feigned sorrow that made my skin crawl. "You had every chance of getting into Stanford. Why would you throw that away?" He took a step toward me, playing to the audience. "If you're struggling with something, talk to me. We're husband and wife. I won't give up on you. You can study for another year and take the exam again. I know you can still get a great score." The performance was masterful. He was painting me as unstable, as a woman who had capriciously thrown away her future, and himself as the patient, forgiving partner. I could see it working on some of the faces in the crowd, the older aunts, the military wives. They nodded sympathetically, their eyes soft for poor, misunderstood Julian. But I was done with performances. "Enough," I said, my voice cutting through his patronizing tone. I didn't raise it, I simply let the cold steel in it ring out. "Spare me the act, Julian. Do you even believe a single word you're saying?" He flinched but doubled down, his eyes pleading with me. "Alara, of course I mean it. I know you'll score high again next year." I let out a short, sharp laugh that held no humor. "And what would that matter? Even if I get the admission letter, it'll just be used to benefit Serena. Isn't that right?" The room froze. The accusation hung in the air, so audacious it was momentarily incomprehensible. People looked from me to Julian to the pale, trembling Serena. What is she talking about? What does Emily's college application have to do with Madison? Yeah, Alara got into Stanford. Serena didn't even qualify. Serena had backed away, hiding behind Julian like a child. His expression shifted through panic and landed on a mask of outraged confusion. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice rising. If you got into Stanford, of course you'd be able to go. The only reason you're not going is because you didn't submit your application. That's right. Serena shrieked from behind him, her voice trembling with a mock outrage that fooled no one. How dare you accuse me? You're the one who made the mistake. You scored high and still didn't apply. Sounds to me like you're hiding something. Maybe your scores aren't even real. Maybe you're just a fraud. Their coordinated attack was a desperate, flailing attempt to shift the blame. And for a moment it worked. The crowd's suspicion swung back toward me. Why wouldn't she fill out her application? Doesn't that defeat the whole point? Maybe she's got mental issues, wasting a spot like that. The whispers grew louder, now directed at me. It was happening just as it had in my first life. The public shaming, the isolation. But this time I was not a victim. I was the catalyst. Julian lifted his chin, sensing a shift in his favor. Elara, unless you can explain yourself today. But before he could finish, a new voice, cold and authoritative, came from the doorway. You're the one who needs to explain. As the voice faded, a group of people walked in. They were not party guests. They moved with an official bearing, their suits crisp, their gazes sharp and assessing. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly from one of chaotic gossip to one of tense, formal inquiry. Leading them was a man I recognized from the grainy photos in military newsletters. Secretary Zhao, head of the disciplinary committee. Julian's face lost all its color. He quickly straightened his posture, a soldier facing a superior officer, and moved forward, his previous bluster gone, replaced by a nervous respect. Secretary Zhao, he said, his voice slightly too loud. What brings you here? Secretary Zhao's expression was stern. He barely glanced at Julian before his eyes scanned the room, taking in the crowded, tense scene. Commander Thorne, he said, his tone icy. We received a letter of accusation and came here specifically to verify the situation. Julian froze. A letter of accusation? What accusation? Before Secretary Zhao could answer, Serena, in a breathtaking act of stupidity, pushed forward. You got here just in time. Arrest her. Arrest Elara. She cheated on her exams. She's a fraud. Julian, seeing a way to align himself with the authorities, quickly echoed her. Secretary, I'm sure Elara didn't do it on purpose. Please give her another chance. I believe the score is real. It must be a misunderstanding. They both stood there, clearly believing Secretary Zhao was here to investigate me. The sheer, blind arrogance of it was stunning. But Secretary Zhao gave them a look of such profound disdain that Julian took a step back. That's not why I'm here, he said, each word a chip of ice. I'm here for you, Commander Thorne. Julian's mouth opened but no sound came out. Secretary Zhao continued, his voice projecting to every corner of the silent room. You are being accused of abusing your authority by illegally altering and canceling another person's household registration. The gasp that rippled through the crowd was unified. This was no longer about a missing college letter. This was about a grave crime. Julian's eyes shot to me, wide with shock and a dawning terror. He had never expected this. I have no idea who sent that letter, but this is slander, he blustered. Secretary Zhao calmly pulled a stack of documents from a briefcase held by an aide. We wouldn't come without evidence. He held up the papers. According to our investigation, you cancelled your wife, Elara's, registration and replaced it with Serena Miller's. These documents are the proof. We've already frozen the new identity files. All the color drained from Julian's face. He was a ghost in his own home. Someone must have framed me. What reason would I have to do that? This must be Emily's doing. She's been paranoid and jealous for a long time. Serena, who had been standing frozen, turned a sickly pale. It was all her, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. She kept abusing her power as the commander's wife. We didn't know anything. He set me up. Arrest her. She was unraveling, her words a desperate, rambling mess. I almost laughed. The perfect, cunning plan was collapsing under the weight of its own lies. Secretary Zhao remained impassive. If you're innocent, then come with us to clear your name. It wasn't a request. It was an order. The investigators behind him moved forward. The crowd watched, their earlier sympathy for Julian evaporating into looks of horror and disgust. The evidence was right there. Their respected commander was a fraud and a criminal. As the officers approached, Julian finally found his voice, a last desperate gambit. You can't do this. My career, my reputation. Your reputation is precisely what we are here to investigate, Commander, Secretary Zhao replied coldly. Madison tried to back away, but she was immediately surrounded. When she tried to resist, her hands were restrained. She screamed, her hair disheveled, her carefully constructed facade gone, replaced by raw, hysterical terror. I didn't do anything. This isn't my fault. Alara, it was you, wasn't it? You evil bitch. You'll burn for this. I ignored her. I turned to Secretary Zhao, my voice calm and clear. Secretary, not only did they try to have Serena take my identity and go to Stanford in my place, they also erased my household record and turned me into a ghost citizen. I ask for justice. Secretary Zhao looked at me, and for the first time his expression held a flicker of something akin to respect. We will never wrongly accuse an innocent person, and we will never let a guilty one go free. He then pulled out a plastic card from his folder. It was a new ID. He held it up. This is the new identification Serena applied for. The information here has already been changed to match Alara's. She clearly knew what she was doing. There's no way she was tricked. That was the final piece of evidence. Serena's complicity was undeniable. The fight went out of her. She slumped in the officer's grip. All that remained was a venomous glare directed at me. Don't get cocky, she spat, her voice a ragged whisper. If I can't get into Stanford, then neither will you. I finally allowed myself a small, cold smile. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Who says there's no other way to get into Stanford? I asked. The college entrance exam is just one path. Serena scoffed, a pathetic broken sound. Stop lying. You're nothing special. But Secretary Zhao was already holding out a thick cream-colored envelope to me. The second reason I came today was to deliver this. Ms. Vance, Professor Schreiber from Stanford asked me to pass along his regards. He's currently overwhelmed with work but found your research proposal on predictive infrastructure modeling to be groundbreaking. He has extended a formal invitation for you to join his research lab. You can complete your degree there. I took the envelope. The paper was heavy, expensive. I didn't need to open it. I knew what it contained. I had spent the last month in stolen hours at the library writing that proposal. It contained ideas that were a decade ahead of their time, knowledge gleaned from a life of watching national developments from the sidelines. It was my backup plan. My escape route. I looked at Julian. He was staring at the letter in my hand, his eyes wide with utter, complete disbelief. This can't be real, he stammered. How could you? I didn't answer him. I turned back to Secretary Zhao. Thank you, sir. As the officers led a stunned Julian and a sobbing Serena away, the party guests stood in shocked silence. The celebration of my future had become the spectacle of their downfall. The house of cards had collapsed and I was left standing, not amid the wreckage, but on the foundation of a new beginning I had built for myself. The ghost had a name again. And it was a name they would all remember. The silence in the house after Secretary Zhao and his team left was heavier than the previous cacophony. It was a thick, stunned quiet, broken only by the awkward clearing of throats and the rustle of clothing as the party guests shuffled their feet. The mountain of gifts in the corner seemed like a grotesque joke. The bright balloons tied to the chair legs bobbed cheerfully in the morbid atmosphere. Aunt Martha was the first to move. She came to me, her face a mosaic of confusion and pity. Alara, my dear. We had no idea. I offered her a small, tired smile. It wasn't feigned. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation was ebbing, leaving a hollowed-out weariness in its wake. No one did, Aunt Martha. Thank you for coming. It was a gentle dismissal. One by one, the guests offered their mumbled condolences and awkward goodbyes, fleeing the scene of the scandal as quickly as politeness allowed. They left behind the half-eaten food and the full glasses of punch, a ghost party for a future that had just been publicly executed. Principal Albright was the last to leave. He placed a firm, reassuring hand on my shoulder. You have the full support of the school, Alara. What was done to you is an outrage. If you need anything, references, documentation, you come to me. Thank you, sir, I said, my voice thick with a gratitude that was entirely genuine. For everything. He nodded, his expression grim. That man is a disgrace to his uniform. With a final, sympathetic look, he left, closing the door softly behind him. And then I was alone. The silence was now absolute. I stood in the center of the ravaged living room, surrounded by the detritus of a life that had never truly been mine. I felt no triumph, not yet. Just a profound, bone-deep exhaustion and the grim understanding that the battle was not over. The public exposure was just the first step. Now came the legal and personal disentanglement. The next few days were a blur of bureaucratic steps, each one a deliberate act of reclamation. My first stop, accompanied by a stern-faced aide from Secretary Zhao's office, was the records department. The same clerk who had told me I didn't exist now stared at me with wide, fearful eyes. "Ms. Vance," she stammered, "I'm so sorry, I had no idea." "It's not your fault," I said calmly. "I need my identity restored. Now." With the disciplinary committee's authority behind us, the process that had taken Julian months to undo was reversed in hours. I watched as my name was typed back into the system. Alara Vance. Born. Citizen. Existing. The sound of the printer whirring to life, producing a temporary identification document, was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I held the flimsy piece of paper, my hands trembling. It was more valuable than any Stanford admission letter. It was myself returned to me. The following day I went to the bank. This time when I handed the teller my new temporary ID, there was no hesitation. The account was opened in minutes. I transferred the meager savings from the joint account Julian and I shared. Money I had earned through menial labor in my first life, money he had controlled. It was a pittance, but it was mine. Next was the divorce. I met with a lawyer recommended by Secretary Zhao, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Chen. I laid out the facts: bigamy, fraud, identity theft. "We can have the marriage annulled," she said, tapping her pen on a legal pad. "Given the circumstances, it's the cleanest way. It will be as if it never legally existed." "Good," I said. That was what I wanted. To erase him from my history as thoroughly as he had tried to erase me. Julian, from his temporary holding cell, requested to see me repeatedly. I refused every time. Miss Chen relayed his messages, her lip curling in distaste. "He says he's realized his mistakes. He says he only ever loved you. That Serena manipulated him." I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity. It was like hearing a story about a stranger. "The divorce papers," I reminded her. A week after the party I finally agreed to see him. It was not for reconciliation but for closure. My own. The visitation room was cold and smelled of bleach. Julian was brought in. He looked haggard, his uniform replaced by a standard-issue jumpsuit. The confident commander was gone, replaced by a desperate, diminished man. "Alara," he breathed, his eyes red-rimmed. He reached for my hands across the table, but I kept them folded in my lap. "Alara, I know I was wrong. I only now realize how much I can't live without you. The thought of divorcing you, it's like someone's tearing out my heart." I stared at him, my face a mask of impassivity. He mistook my silence for hesitation. "I won't marry Serena. I swear. Once the baby's born, you can raise it. We can still be a family, right? We can forget all of this." The audacity of it was breathtaking. Even now, in utter ruin, he saw me as a tool, a convenient solution to his mess. He thought I would raise his illegitimate child with the woman who destroyed me. "Are you still dreaming, Julian?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "The only path you have left is divorcing me. What happens between you and Serena is none of my business." His face crumpled. "Why? I made one mistake. Do you really have to be this cruel?" He reached out again, trying to grab my hand. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I leaned over the table, and with all the force of my 18-year-old body and my 36-year-old rage, I slapped him hard across the face. The crack echoed in the sterile room. "Enough," I snarled. "Stop making excuses. Nothing you say will change the fact that you're scum. You better never show your face in front of me again." I turned and walked out without a backward glance. I didn't hear his response. I didn't care. The ghost of the man I had loved was finally, truly exorcised. The annulment came through with startling speed, a testament to the severity of the crimes and the influence of the disciplinary committee. The day the papers were signed, I went to the small safe where we kept important documents. I pulled out our marriage certificate. I looked at the smiling, youthful faces. Two strangers. A lie captured on paper. Without a moment of hesitation, I tore it in half, then into quarters and let the pieces flutter into the trash can. I'm still a ghost citizen right now, I murmured to the empty room. That paper means nothing. Just a worthless scrap. The final piece was Stanford. I wrote to Professor Schreiber accepting his invitation. He responded with a warm letter and a package of preparatory materials. My life condensed into a single large suitcase and a backpack. I booked a train ticket to the city where the university was located. The morning of my departure, I took one last look around the house. It held no nostalgia for me. It was a shell, a stage where a tragedy had been performed. I felt no sadness, only a profound sense of lightness, of possibility. As I waited for the taxi, a black car pulled up. Secretary Zhao stepped out. He handed me a sealed envelope. The final report, he said. Commander Thorne has been dishonorably discharged. Criminal charges for fraud and corruption are proceeding. The woman, Serena, is being charged as an accomplice. Their child. He sighed. The child will be born into a difficult situation. I took the envelope. Thank you, Secretary Zhao. For your integrity. He nodded. You are a remarkable young woman, Ms. Vance. What they tried to take from you they could never truly touch. Your mind. Your resilience. I have no doubt you will excel at Stanford. The taxi arrived. I put my suitcase in the trunk and slid into the back seat. As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. I looked forward through the windshield at the road stretching out ahead. I was leaving the ghost behind. Alara Vance was going to build a life, not have one stolen for her. The past was a country I had escaped. The future was a blank page, and for the first time I was the one holding the pen. The train ride away from my old life was a journey through a healing landscape. With every mile the tracks devoured, the tight knot of anger and grief in my chest began to loosen. I watched towns and fields blur past, not as places I was leaving behind, but as spaces I was moving through, a transient spectator on my way to a destination of my own choosing. The weight of the past was still there, but it was no longer a shackle. It had become ballast, steadying me for the voyage ahead. Stanford was not what I expected. In my first life, it had been an impossible dream, a castle in the clouds. Now it was brick and mortar, sprawling lawns, and the low California sun. It was real. Professor Schreiber's lab was a world of humming computers, whiteboards dense with equations, and the sharp, clean smell of ozone and coffee. The professor himself was a bear of a man with a wild gray beard and eyes that missed nothing. Vance, he grunted when I introduced myself, looking me up and down as if assessing a new piece of equipment. The proposal on predictive infrastructure decay. The model for bridge fatigue. Where did a girl from a small town get ideas like that? I had prepared for this. I couldn't very well say, from 2 decades of watching national news as a homeless ghost. Instead, I met his gaze steadily. Observation, sir. And a lot of reading. I noticed patterns. I just extrapolated. He stared at me for a long moment, then a slow grin spread across his face. You extrapolated. I like that. Well, don't just stand there. Your desk is over there. Don't break anything. And that was it. I was in. The work was all-consuming in the best way. It demanded every ounce of my focus, leaving no room for the ghosts of Julian or Serena. I learned to code, to run complex simulations, to argue my points with data and logic. The other graduate students were initially wary of the 18-year-old prodigy, but my quiet competence and willingness to put in brutal hours eventually won a grudging respect. I was no one's wife, no one's victim. I was Alara Vance, researcher. I found a small studio apartment off campus, its emptiness a luxury after a lifetime of shared, suffocating spaces. I filled it with books, second-hand furniture, and a profound, cherished silence. For the first time, my life was my own. I went where I wanted, ate what I wanted, answered to no one. The simple act of buying groceries felt like a revolutionary act of independence. Months bled into a year. I avoided news from my hometown, building a deliberate wall between my new life and the old. But news, especially scandalous news, has a way of seeping through cracks. An email from Principal Albright arrived, brief and to the point. Lara. Thought you should know. The Thorns trial was swift. Julian received a 5-year sentence for fraud, abuse of power, and bigamy. Serena, given her pregnancy and deemed a manipulated accomplice, got 2 years probation. The baby, a boy, was born while she was under house arrest. The story made the national papers for a week. A cautionary tale. I hope you are well and thriving. Albright. I read the email 3 times. 5 years. It felt both too long and not long enough. There was no surge of victory, just a cold, quiet satisfaction. Justice of a sort had been served. I deleted the email. They were part of a closed chapter. My work with Professor Schreiber flourished. My extrapolations, grounded in the very real knowledge of which national infrastructure projects would fail in the coming decades, led to published papers that garnered quiet attention. I wasn't just a student, I was becoming an expert. The ghost was building something that would outlast her. During my 2nd year, I received a message from an unexpected source. Miss Chin, my lawyer. It was a formal notice. Julian Thorne from prison was petitioning for a reduction in his sentence. Part of his appeal was a statement claiming he had made amends, and that his wronged wife had forgiven him. He had listed me as a character witness. A cold fury ignited in me. Even from behind bars he was trying to use me to manipulate the narrative. I wrote back to Ms. Chin immediately, authorizing her to submit a blistering counterstatement detailing the full extent of his crimes against me, and stating in unequivocal terms that there was no forgiveness now or ever. I heard nothing more about the sentence reduction. The incident was a stark reminder that the past was not entirely dead. It was a sleeping beast that could occasionally stir. It made me double down on my work, building my future so high and so strong that no ghost from the past could ever hope to reach me. I graduated a year early summa cum laude. Professor Schreiber offered me a full-time research position. "The work you're doing, Vance, it's important," he said, uncharacteristically earnest. "You have a vision. Don't waste it." I didn't plan to. But another offer arrived, one that pulled at a different part of me. It was an invitation from the National Infrastructure Advisory Board. They were forming a new committee to assess aging public works, and my published papers had landed on the right desk. They wanted me to consult. The project would involve travel, including a site assessment in my home state, near the city I had fled. A part of me recoiled. Go back? Never. But another part, the part that was no longer a victim but an authority, was intrigued. This was a chance to go back not as the erased Alara but as an expert. To face the ghosts on my own terms, from a position of unassailable strength. It was the final act of reclamation. I accepted. The journey back was surreal. I flew first class, a world away from the gritty train ride out. I was met at the airport by a young, nervous aide from the provincial government. "Dr. Vance? Welcome. We've booked you into the guest house. The preliminary meetings start tomorrow." Dr. Vance. The title was a shield. I was no longer just Alara. The guest house was a far cry from my old studio, let alone the house I had shared with Julian. It was quiet, elegant, impersonal. As I unpacked my suitcase, I felt a strange sense of calm. This was not a return, it was a visit. I was a tourist in my own past. The work was engaging. I spent my days in conference rooms with engineers and politicians, my analyses and predictions listened to with rapt attention. My knowledge, born of future tragedies, allowed me to pinpoint weaknesses with an uncanny accuracy that bordered on prescience. I was respected. Heard. It was on the 3rd evening, as I was returning to the guest house after a long day, that I saw him. He was loitering near the entrance, a shambling figure in a worn-out coat too heavy for the mild weather. His hair was grayer, his face lined and gaunt. But I would have recognized him anywhere. "Julian." My steps didn't falter. I walked toward the door, my keycard in hand. "Alara." His voice was hoarse, raspy from disuse or cheap liquor. I stopped and turned, regarding him with the same detached curiosity I would afford a stray animal. He looked much older than his years, a hollowed-out version of the handsome commander. "Mr. Thorne," I said, my tone neutral. He flinched at the formal address. "All these years," he began, wringing his hands nervously, "I've truly realized my mistakes. What I did, it was monstrous. Please, come back. I promise I'll treat you well. We can start over." I stared at him, incredulous. The sheer, breathtaking audacity had not diminished with time. "You still haven't married Serena?" I asked, not out of interest but as a point of clinical fact. "She was carrying your child, wasn't she?" His expression flickered with a familiar panic and guilt. "I didn't," he said hurriedly. She clung to me, but I never wanted her. I've only ever loved you. I only wanted to marry you. The child, he could be registered under your name if you want. We could be a proper family. The words were so vile, so utterly devoid of morality that for a moment I was speechless. He was offering me his illegitimate son as a consolation prize. He reached out, his grimy hand trying to grasp mine. I yanked my arm back as if from a hot stove, my voice dropping to an icy whisper. Julian Thorne, you are truly disgusting. I turned to walk away, the encounter leaving a foul taste in my mouth. But the drama was not yet over. From the shadows of a nearby alley, a figure lunged forward. It was Serena. She was haggard, her clothes threadbare, her face a mask of rage and desperation. Clutched in her arms was a small, thin boy of about 4 or 5. You, she screamed, her voice raw. You bitch. How dare you show your face? You stole my man. She swung a hand at me, her nails ragged and dirty. But before she could reach me, Julian moved with a speed I didn't think he still possessed. He jumped between us and shoved her back with a harsh, brutal push. She stumbled and collapsed onto the dirty pavement, the child wailing in her arms. Get away from her, you crazy woman. Julian snarled. Serena sat in the grime, staring up at him, her face a picture of utter betrayal. You heartless bastard, she wailed, her voice cracking. I gave birth to your son. I've done everything for you. And now you don't care if we live or die. He's about to start school and doesn't even have a household registration because of you. How could you? I watched them, the two architects of my misery, now tearing each other apart in the gutter. The hatred between them was a palpable force. There was no love, no loyalty, only a bitter, toxic dependency. The child cried, a pitiful sound in the evening air. I felt no pity. I felt no schadenfreude. I felt nothing but a profound, overwhelming need to be away from them. They were a disease and I was immune. Without a word, I turned my back on the pathetic scene. I slid my key card into the lock, the green light flashing. I stepped into the clean, quiet lobby of the guest house, and the door swung shut behind me, blocking out their voices, their misery, their entire wretched world. The ghost had not been laid to rest. It had simply become irrelevant. I had a meeting in the morning. I had a report to write. I had a life to live. The scene outside the guest house lingered in my mind not as a trauma, but as a clinical confirmation. Julian and Serena were exactly what I had known them to be. Parasites who, having drained their primary host, were now turning on each other. The image of that child, caught between them, sparked a faint, distant pang of sympathy, but it was quickly extinguished by the cold logic of self-preservation. His tragedy was of their making, not mine. To involve myself would be to step back into the quicksand. The rest of my consultancy passed without further incident. I delivered my final report to the provincial board. My recommendations met with grave nods and promises of action. My work here was done. As my taxi pulled away from the government building for the last time, I felt a chapter closing with a sense of finality that the annulment papers had never quite provided. I was leaving, and this time I knew I would never return. Back at Stanford, I threw myself into my research with renewed intensity. The encounter had been a vaccination, a small dose of the poison reminding me of why I needed to build such a formidable immune system. Professor Schreiber noticed the shift. The trip lit a fire under you, Vance, he remarked, peering at a complex simulation I was running on urban traffic flow. Good. The world needs more fire. Months turned into another year. I was promoted, given my own small team, my name gaining weight in academic circles. The past was a receding shoreline. Then one rainy Tuesday evening an email arrived from Ms. Chen. The subject line was simple. Update. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I almost deleted it unread. But a stubborn sense of obligation, the need to see the story through to its final punctuation, made me click. Miss Vance. I thought you should be formally notified. Julian Thorne was released from prison 3 months ago, his sentence reduced for good behavior. I have been informed by authorities in your former hometown that he and Serena Miller are both deceased. The words were stark and black on the screen. I stopped breathing for a moment. The details are sordid. They were living in a state-funded shelter, their situation dire. It appears Julian managed to secure a small amount of cash, possibly from panhandling, with the intention of buying a train ticket to try and find work in another city. Serena discovered he had hidden the money from her. A violent argument ensued. In the struggle, Serena stabbed him with a kitchen knife. He died at the scene. While attempting to flee with the child, Serena slipped on the wet, icy steps of the shelter and fell into the nearby river. The current was swift, the water freezing. She drowned. The child was found cold but alive, clinging to the riverbank. He has been placed into the state foster system. I am sorry to be the bearer of such grim news. While I know you hold no affection for these individuals, it is a tragic end. The case is closed. Miss Chin. I sat back in my chair, the hum of my computer the only sound in the room. I read the email again and then a third time. I expected to feel something. Triumph, vindication, even a shred of grief for the lives wasted. But what I felt was nothing. A vast, hollow emptiness. It was like reading a news report about strangers in a faraway country. The connection was severed. They were names from a story that had ended long ago. Heaven has a way of delivering justice, but it is rarely dramatic. It is slow, grinding, and often self-inflicted. They hadn't been struck by lightning. They had rotted from the inside out, their own toxicity finally consuming them completely. The universe hadn't punished them. It had simply stopped intervening in their downward spiral. I closed the email and deleted it. There was no one to tell, no one who would understand the complex web of history that made this news significant. It was a secret that would die with me. I got up, poured myself a glass of water and looked out my window at the lights of the campus. The rain had stopped and the pavement gleamed under the streetlights. It was a clean, washed world. The next morning I went to the lab as usual. I attended meetings, reviewed data, argued with a colleague about statistical models. The news of their deaths changed nothing in my present reality. It was simply an endnote, a final period on a sentence I had finished reading years before. My work continued to gain recognition. I was invited to speak at international conferences. My research on predictive infrastructure modeling began to influence national policy. The ghost girl was now Dr. Ilara Vance, a respected voice in her field. The past was not a chain. It was a foundation, ugly but solid, upon which I had built something durable and true. Several years later, I was offered a permanent position as a research fellow at the National Academy of Sciences. It was the pinnacle of academic achievement. I accepted, packing up my life in California for the move to the East Coast. My new apartment had a view of the city, a landscape of endless possibility. I was 30 years old and my life was my own creation. One evening, shortly after I'd settled in, I was working late at my new office. A junior fellow, a bright young woman named Anya, popped her head in. "Dr. Vance? A bunch of us are heading for a drink. Come with. You've been buried in here for days." I looked up from my blueprints. The invitation was casual, friendly. In my first life I would have shrunk from it, too burdened by secrecy and shame. Now I smiled. "Sure. That sounds nice." Sitting in a noisy bar, surrounded by colleagues who knew nothing of my history, who respected me only for my mind and my work, I felt a profound sense of peace. I laughed at a joke, offered an opinion on a recent publication, and for a few hours I was just Ilara. Not a victim, not an avenger, not a prodigy. Just a person connected to the present. Walking home alone under the city lights, the cool night air on my face, I thought about the child. The boy. He would be 9 or 10 by now. Lost in the labyrinth of the foster system. A life born from deceit and raised in chaos. For a moment I considered the possibility of finding him. Of offering some form of help, not as a mother, I could never be that, but as a benefactor. An anonymous scholarship, perhaps. But I dismissed the idea almost as quickly as it came. To reach into his life would be to drag my past into his future. It would be to define him by the tragedy of his origins, just as Julian and Serena had tried to define me. The kindest thing I could do for that boy was to remain a stranger. To let him build his own story, free from the shadow of mine. Their story was over. It had ended in the cold and the dark as mine had once before. But I had been given a rare gift. A second chance. I had not wasted it. I had built a life of light and purpose. I reached my building and rode the elevator up to my quiet, peaceful apartment. I stood on the balcony, looking out at the glittering tapestry of the city. There were no ghosts here. There was only the future, vast and unwritten, and I was no longer afraid of the blank page. I had become the author of my own life. And the story finally was good. Peace, I discovered, was not a dramatic state of being. It was not the absence of conflict. but the presence of a deep, unshakable equilibrium. It was the quiet hum of a well-functioning laboratory, the weight of a respected journal in my hands, the simple pleasure of a Saturday morning with no demands more pressing than the choice between coffee and tea. Decades flowed like a gentle river. My hair, once dark, was now shot through with elegant silver. The sharp edges of the young prodigy had softened into the seasoned authority of a senior research fellow at the National Academy. My work on predictive urban resilience had become foundational, my name a footnote in textbooks. I had advised presidents and mayors, not as a political creature but as a voice of pure data. The ghost girl had become an institution. I never married again. The concept of sharing a life, of intertwining my hard-won sovereignty with another, held no appeal. My relationships were with colleagues, with friends made over shared intellectual passions, with a few kindred spirits who valued solitude as much as I did. My life was full, but it was a fullness of my own careful design. One crisp autumn afternoon I was cleaning out my office, preparing for a gradual semi-retirement. I was not leaving the academy, merely shifting my focus to mentoring the next generation of fire starters, as Professor Schreiber had once called us. Among a stack of old journals, a small, faded envelope fluttered to the floor. It was not the Stanford invitation, nor any legal document. It was a birthday card. My mother had given it to me on my 16th birthday, 2 years before she died. I had forgotten it existed. My hands, now lined with the maps of time, trembled slightly as I opened it. Her handwriting, a looping, generous script, filled the inside. To my brilliant Alara. Follow your star. Don't let anyone ever tell you that you are not enough. The world will try to put you in a small box. Burn the box. I am so proud of the woman you are becoming. All my love. I sat down heavily in my chair, the card held gently in my hands. I had not thought of her in years, not in a concrete way. The memory of her had been so overshadowed by the betrayal that followed her death. But reading her words, a dam broke inside me. Not a dam of grief, but of recognition. She had known. Somehow, in the way mothers do, she had sensed the challenges I would face. She had been trying to arm me for a battle she couldn't name. For the first time since my rebirth, I wept. I wept for the mother I lost, for the girl who had been too broken to remember her words, and for the profound circular justice of it all. I had in the end burned the box. I had followed my star. I had become the woman she hoped I would be. The tears were cleansing. They washed away the last fine dust of the past. When they subsided, I felt lighter than I had in my entire life. The journey was complete. My later years were spent in a comfortable apartment overlooking a botanical garden. I wrote a memoir not of vengeance but of resilience. I framed it as a scientific principle, a system's ability to withstand shock and rebuild itself. I never mentioned Julian or Serena by name. They were merely the shock. The book was well received, seen as a metaphor for societal recovery. Only I knew it was a literal truth. Students would sometimes visit, their young faces bright with ambition. They would ask for advice for the secret to a lasting career. Curiosity, I would tell them, and the courage to protect it above all else. Protect your curiosity like it is your life. Because it is. I never spoke of my first life. It was a private foundational myth, the dark matter that held my universe together but was never seen. On my 75th birthday, the Academy threw a small, dignified party. There were speeches, a plaque, a sense of warm, earned celebration. As I stood to thank them, I looked out at the faces, colleagues, friends, protégés. There was no one left who knew me as anything but Dr. Vance. The transformation was absolute. That night, back in my quiet apartment, I stood on the balcony. The city lights twinkled like a field of steady stars. I felt a profound connection to the 18-year-old girl kneeling on the hot pavement, searching for her mother's earrings. I wished I could tell her that the pain was not the end of the story. I wished I could show her this view. But she was me and I was her. We had survived. We had thrived. A soft breeze rustled the leaves in the garden below. It carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine. I took a deep, contented breath. There were no more battles to fight, no more ghosts to haunt me. There was only this quiet horizon, this deep and lasting peace. I had been given a second chance and I had used it well. The story of Alara Vance was not a tragedy. It was a testament. And as I turned from the balcony to go inside, I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that it had been a very good story after all. The